Ahead and start the recording. Welcome everybody and everybody viewing the recording. I hope everybody's mornings, afternoons, and evenings are going well. I'm excited to have you here for the next iteration of the Accelerating Impacts Challenge workshops. This time, we will be focusing on Pitching 201. And then to that end, today we are joined by Oliver Libby, a co-founder of Resolution and current chairman of the Resolution Project and managing partner at HL Ventures. Oliver will share best practices for pitching and answer some of your questions that you may have as you are preparing for the Accelerated Impact Challenge. As a reminder, we are recording this session and I will be taking notes that we'll be distributing out at the end of the session to everybody on the call and everybody who is not able to join us today. So please feel free to drop in any questions that you might have in the chat. And then please, when prompted, go ahead and raise your hand in the Zoom meeting function for questions. Thank you all for being here. We're very excited to bring AIC back to Resolution and bring all of your wonderful ventures with us this year. But with that, I'll turn it over to Oliver.
Thanks, Toby, and great to see everybody. I know many of you and some not, but delighted to be able to host this session this morning, afternoon, or evening, depending on where I find you. What I plan to do, and for those of you who have worked with me before, you'll know I will present to you for the minimum amount of time possible. So I have a few points that I want to share with you that I think cross-cut almost any kind of pitching, not just for the AIC, but for almost any format, and I'll share those with you. And then what I would prefer to do with our time, if possible, is to spend the most amount of time that I can answering your questions directly, the real world situations that you're in, and see what I can do to help. So with that in mind, I'll begin with a few of these key points, and feel free to interrupt with raised hands or questions at any moment. Otherwise, we will leave the bulk of our time at the end of a short presentation for your questions. And so with that, pitching is something that, it's funny, I used to say that there is no profession on earth that doesn't require you to be able to pitch. My grandfather and my great-great-uncle were both very famous scientists, but they still had to pitch for grant funding and for attention and talent. And there really isn't a job in the world that doesn't require you to ask for something at some point, for support, for resources, for belief. And that's really what pitching is all about. There are kind of 4 key points and then one overarching message that I want to deliver to you today when I think about pitching in general. And obviously, I know we're pretty focused on the AIC pitches for your social ventures, but I would think of this more broadly also as a framework for accessing resources and asking for resources in any time in your life, in any context. The first point that I want to start with is knowing what you need. You would be amazed, perhaps, to know how frequently, and just to situate you, I obviously chair the board and co-founder at Resolution Project, and I run a venture capital firm, so I get pitched roughly 5,000 to 6,000 times a year. So I see a lot of this. You'd be amazed how often people who come to pitch one or another of these entities for resources don't actually know how much they need, why they need it, what they're going to do with it. They kind of say, well, I'm looking to raise a seed round of funding for my startup, or I'm looking to raise a first set of grants for my nonprofit, or whatever it is. Generally speaking, I kind of read in the papers that that's $2 million. So I think we're going to do that. And my view always is, I don't know why. Maybe you need 3 million. Maybe you need 500,000. Maybe you need $2. I don't know. So the first and most important thing is to really understand and know what you need. And we often refer to that in the venture capital world as the use of proceeds. You'll see that from time to time, but it really just means how much money do you need, and why are you going to, what are you going to do with it? It is also important to understand how that fits in with your own structure. Are you for profit? Are you not for profit? In either case, what type of for-profit or not-for-profit are you? What type of funding are you looking for? Is it a grant? Is it an investment? If so, what are the types of investment structures that exist in your jurisdiction and for the type of funding you're trying to reach, so that you can guide funders in the direction that you want them to. So it's not just the use of proceeds, how much and what are you going to do with it? It's how are you going to receive it, and in what structure might that be most advantageous for you as a social entrepreneur. So I think those are really important topics. The last thing within knowing what you need is also knowing what you can give. So, of course, in the case of a for-profit social enterprise, you're going to give up some equity in your venture. In the case of a grant, it might be more on the in the realm of giving up some sort of access to your board or to information. But it's always knowing what can you give up and how much are you willing to give up in exchange for the money that you need. So that's the first point, is knowing what you need, use of proceeds, potential structures, and what can you give in order to get that. I'm going to keep going unless there's any questions, but again, if you have any questions along the way, please raise your hand. I will say that one of the things that this first point kind of necessitates is preparation before fundraising. A lot of people like to say, well, it feels like it's time to fundraise, I'm just going to go start talking to people. And there is an axiom that is the best time to talk to funders is when you don't need money, because you can start to build a relationship. But I promise you, when you start raising an actual round, if you haven't done all the preparatory work, we will know as funders, and it does not usually go well. So that knowing what you need, the use of proceeds, the structure, the what you can give, all that stuff should be done well before you open, you fire the starting gun on the actual fundraise. The second point is a philosophical point, but a really important one, and it's knowing your audience. Those of you who've heard this from me before know that I believe that there is 3 kinds of audiences for receiving a pitch. And I mean this from an investment, from a grant perspective, even frankly, from the perspective of people who might be looking to join your team. So any kind of resource, capital, human capital, access to free goods, whatever it is, there's 3 kinds of people who are going to listen to you. Number one, there's what I call the personal givers. That is to say, they know you and they're going to support you no matter what. This is often referred to as friends and family. It's usually a pretty small circle. In some cases, especially in less privileged areas, it's a very small circle. But there are some people, maybe it's your uncle who says, or your aunt who says, yep, you know what, I don't really care what you're doing, I'm going to help you, here's an investment, here's a grant, whatever it is. If you're fortunate enough to have lots of personal givers, that's wonderful. But for the purposes of this discussion, let's assume that you have none. This leaves you then with 2 kinds of givers, and I call them the story giver and the model giver. And they're very different. You can usually tell pretty early on, or you can ask whomever made the introduction what type of giver the person you're going to talk to is. But it's critically important that you know, because if you pitch a model to a story giver, or you pitch a story to a model giver, it will go very badly. The same exact social venture with the same exact statistics and plans and use of proceeds and structures and all of that will go badly or well, depending on whether you know if you're speaking to a story giver and a model giver. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, the story giver is the person who is moved by a story. So, for example, just because Wandile happens to be on the screen and I can see him, if someone is sitting across from Wandile who is a story giver, they're going to be moved that Wandile is doing work often in the communities from which he came. They are going to be moved by his story growing up in the slums of Durban. They're going to be moved when he tells them about the first family that he helped and what their names were, and the fact that in their very house there's now dozen people doing business, right? And that will bring a tear to their eyes, and it moves them to give or to invest. And that's a very real kind of supporter. And I can name you who those people are for Resolution. They exist, and they're wonderful because they will support you very staunchly. They are not the only kind of giver, though. A very important kind of giver, who sometimes is the wealthier kind and the kind that can give you more resources over time, are the model givers. And the model givers are the people who say, look, I like your story, I'm moved, whatever. Tell me about the system. How scalable is it? How do you make money, or how do you remain sustainable? How do you impact your beneficiaries? And it's really important for you to have those answers too, because otherwise you're not going to be successful. And so the model givers really keep your nose to the grindstone. And as you can already tell, if you do the wrong pitch to the wrong person, it's a disaster. If you go to a model giver who's really interested in the numbers and the model and how you bring in revenues or how you deliver impact, and you say, well, let me tell you the story of, John Smith, my first beneficiary, they're going to say, great, John Smith is one person. That's great. But tell me about how you get to 1,000 or 10,000 Johns, right? On the other hand, though, if you go to a story giver and you say, I'm going to walk you through all the statistics and here's the revenue ramp and here's the whole model and how I do it, they're going to say, I'm not inspired, right? And so you really need to understand your audience. And in fact, most successful entrepreneurs actually have several versions of their pitch. It's all the same bones, but you structure them in different ways. And you use what I call the sandwich sometimes for the story givers, where you start and finish with a story. You always have to deliver the model, right? You can't get away with just saying, look, I helped one person. It's an amazing story. Give me money. I mean, maybe you can, but usually it doesn't work. But for a story giver, you have to start and end with something that brings it home for them and makes it real. With the model givers, you end with the vision for the future, the scalability. We're going to get to 1 million people in 5 years, whatever it is, right? And so if you don't understand the audience, and oftentimes you can get that information before you sit down and pitch, but if not, you can almost immediately tell when you start the conversation. If you start with, my name is Oliver Libby and I come from this place and I saw this person on the street doing this thing and it moved me. And someone's like, yeah, oh, me too. I believe that, then you know who you're talking to. It's a story giver. If they're kind of like, okay, so then what, and you're going to do this in how many neighborhoods? You're talking to a model giver and you can change the direction of the pitch. This is very important. So first of all, know what you need. Second of all, know your audience. What is the third point? The third point is narrative and materials. So I like to say a good pitch, and this builds right off of our second point, is a mixture of inspiration and information. And in order to do this, you need to be prepared. So what is the toolkit for a successful fundraise? Well, number one, you need to have a really tight pitch. And that tight pitch or narrative is, and sometimes it's a couple of versions like we just talked about, it should be in your memory. By the way, I know it's helpful for some people to memorize the pitch. If you can, like, doing an okay pitch is the 100 level, memorizing your pitch is the 200 level, giving a pitch from here that you know so well that it flows is the 3000 level. If I see someone kind of saying like, okay, well, thank you for taking the pitch. Let me begin with, I know that they're reciting it by heart and I'm okay with that because I want the information, but if you can just flow and really tell the story and the narrative based on your preparation and the materials, that's really important. Now, any pitch, you need a good deck. The deck is where everything lives. It's also the place where you can retreat to if you get lost within your own pitch, which happens sometimes. It's nerve-wracking, right? Let's admit the truth, which is when you're asking for money or support, it's nervous, it's nerve-wracking and it's stressful. So the good deck and a place where you can turn back to get your pitch back on the rails is really important. You also, though, need more things. So, for example, there's usually underneath the deck something that in the venture capital space we call a data room. You don't need to call it a data room, but it just means all the other things that an investor or grantor might want to see if they like your pitch. And the worst thing in the world is to have a really good call or Zoom or in-person meeting for a pitch. And by the way, we'll talk a little bit about that in a second. And then not follow up with all the things they need. They might want to see a financial model. They might want to understand your biggest contracts or the deal that you have with the building in which will be housing your program or whatever it is. That data room, have it in like a Dropbox or a box or even a PDF file and be ready, because the best case scenario on a pitch, all you're trying to do with a pitch is get to the next meeting, right? This is really important. All you're trying to do is get them to say not no, but yes, send me some more information. Yes, I'm interested in now meeting in person, whatever it is. So make sure you have that data room that backs up your deck. Also, the structure for whatever the investment will look like. If it's a grant, make sure that you have all the information to take that grant. If it's an investment, make sure you have that convertible note document or that equity financing and you have a lawyer in place that can help you get through the financing. Again, time kills all deals. So if you have a great pitch and then you're not prepared on the data room or on the deal documentation, whatever it might be, grant, investment, or otherwise, then you're going to lose time and possibly lose the deal because, again, time kills all deals. This is a really important thing. So narrative and materials, make sure that you're ready to go. Know what you need, know your audience, be ready with your materials. The last thing I want to talk about is networking. That is to say, how do you organize going out for this money? So first of all, networking is a volume game. Do not let anyone tell you otherwise. I very rarely see people successful when they only do 2 or 3 pitches. I realize this may seem simple to you, but a lot of people do it because they don't like asking for money because, again, asking for money and support is stressful and it's not fun. And a lot of people really don't like to do it, so they want to do the least amount of it possible. But the truth is, when you're out there looking for resources, you can't really do that. You have to go out in volume, which means a really sophisticated network. And what is the most important thing in a really sophisticated networking endeavor is the way you track the network. So I built my own system in Excel, which I call Tracker. It's about a 50 gigabyte Excel file. You do not need to do anything crazy like that because I track about 4,000 to 5,000 contacts per year. But you want to have whatever system you're going to do, whether it's an Excel sheet, a Word document, a contact relationship management system, if you happen to have one, whatever it is, make sure that you're keeping track of things. Then make sure that you establish a really good cadence of how you follow up and contact people. I tend to contact people every 2 weeks. And I believe that if you keep it respectful and positive, you can contact people every 2 weeks for years, and it doesn't matter. If you don't hear back, you just try again 2 weeks later. You will be astonished the number of times that I have reached out for like the 7th time. And a lot of people have ego about this, and they're like, if you ignored me 6 times, I'm done with you. But email is cheap, folks. So in fact, the 7th time you reach out every 2 weeks, and it's just like, hi, Whitley, I am, I'm just checking in again on this pitch. I would really love to meet with you. And finally, Whitley, digs out from his email and he's ready to say, yeah, I'll take a meeting. Like, that wasn't expensive to you to send 7 emails, but it shows resilience. The only thing you want to do is keep it respectful. I've seen people be like, do this kind of dumb thing where they're like, I've seen you ignore 6 of my emails, but here's one last try. It never works, right? It just doesn't. It just takes people off. You just keep it positive. So again, using our man Whitley here as an example, dear Whitley, I'm sure it's been a really busy summer. I would be really thrilled to have the chance to talk with you. I'm just following up again. Thank you so much for your patience, and please let me know if there's a good time to talk. And you just copy that email, and every 2 weeks you send it out. You'd be amazed what happens, 2 months later when they finally get around to it. Because remember, in fundraising, you are usually the 100th priority for whomever you're asking money from, but they're your first priority. And it's not an insult to you that they're busy. There are a lot of people usually asking folks who have money for money. And so you just have to understand, you keep at it respectfully, you do the follow-up. The other thing is to keep the high ground. So if you get pushback or someone is short with you, I don't have time to meet with you right now. Sometimes I just never hear back from folks. You never want to do that because you never know when you're going to run into people again, or when someone will reintroduce you to that person and say, no, you really have to take them seriously. And if you were not keeping the high ground, you've lost an opportunity. So even if someone passes and says, look, I don't have time to talk with you, Anel, I'm done here. Then you write back and you say, you know what, thank you so much for letting me know. I look forward to staying in touch with you. If it's okay with you, from time to time, I'll keep you updated on my progress. I've never seen someone say, no, don't bother me, right? And so that shows you have poise, you held the high ground. And again, it's amazing how many times half a year later, you're back with that person because their best friend introduced you again. And they're like, I remember Anel was really, held the high ground in that conversation. I didn't have time to talk to her before, but now that I've got this other introduction, yeah, I'm ready to take it seriously. And that was an impressive, mature way of handling it. So hold the high ground. The other important thing is no doesn't always mean that you're at the end of the line. So I have a friend, a really good friend in the media space, who says no means hello. In fundraising, you're going to hear no 95% of the time. That's not because your pitch is good or bad, or you're great or not great. It's just the way it works out. It happens for me too. I'm constantly raising money for Resolution Project, for our venture capital funds, and I hear no an awful lot. No just means not now. And so number one, you want to keep those people in your network. You want to try them again when you have something else, because you just never know when the right time will be. But the other thing about no is it's actually, for most people, stressful to say no. Because, they got to know you, or maybe they got an introduction from a friend and they don't really want to make you sad, but they're not going to invest. And so they say, hey, Matheny, it's going to be a no. And then if you are really smart, what you say is, look, I'm really sorry to hear that. I was really hoping to work with you. Question: if you liked anything that you saw in our pitch, are there a couple people that you know who might like it? And you'd be amazed. People feel really bad when they say no. So they'll say, you know what, I'm going to think about that. Actually, my friend Jimmy is a really good, maybe he's the right fit for you. And you generate another 1 or 2 introductions. So it's like the old Greek myth of the Hydra. If you chop one head off and you hear no, maybe you get 2 more heads in response. So always keep the positivity, keep the networking. It's really easy to get down during fundraising. It happens all the time. It happens to me. If I'm really far down the line with a potential funder, I finally get a no after the 8th meeting, and I'm like, oh man, this sucks, right? Like, this is terrible. But you just keep at it. You keep at it relentlessly. Thank you so much for your time. I'm so sorry it didn't work out. Do you have anyone else that you think might, based on what you learned about us, be interested? Can I keep you updated on our progress every few months? Can we come back with the next fund or the next business or the next round, whatever it is? Just relentlessly hold the high ground, keep that follow-up, and be organized about your networking, and that's critical. So know what you need and the structures, know your audience and which version of your pitch you're going to use, have your narrative and your materials really prepped, and kill the networking and keep it positive, respectful, and relentless. That's the key. Now, two other things, and then I'm going to turn it over to questions. Number one, as we were just talking about, fundraising requires resilience. It just is a really like nobody just loves fundraising. I don't know one single person who's like, yes, I get to raise more money again, right? Like it sucks. It's about as fun as taking your car, if you happen to have a car, to the filling station and loading up gas for a really fun road trip. You're not going to go on the road trip without the gas, but no one starts a road trip in order to go to the gas station, right? Or petrol, if you happen to think it's petrol. And so it's just not the fun part, but you're not going to go far without, so you have to do it well. And so again, resilience, right? You're going to hear no, you're going to be frustrated. People are going to pass for stupid reasons. By the way, to call a spade, if you look like me, you're going to hear no a little less frequently than if you are not a cisgendered white male. This is just a part of the statistics of fundraising. That frustrates the heck out of people too, and it should. But always remember, there is very likely a funder out there for you. And so just keep at it relentlessly. Go past the double standards, go past the silly passes, go past all of the frustration and get to what you need, because the best vindication at the end is your success. So let me finish with the last thing that I want to say. By the way, I promised you I would cover one thing before we get to the last point. In person versus virtual. Nowadays, you can do a lot of pitching virtually. If possible, find a way to get in person eventually, because you always have a higher hit rate in person. But the good news is, in the modern Zoom economy, you can get a lot further into the conversation before you have to meet someone in person or fly or do whatever you need to do. So just keep in mind, like in person, you will have a higher percentage success rate because it's very hard to say no to someone in person, but you can take the first few meetings now virtually, and that's considered acceptable, and so that's important. So let's wrap up with the last thing I wanted to tell you. Fundraising, oftentimes people view it like my namesake Oliver Twist in the great musical and movie Oliver Twist, which is, please, sir, may I have some more? I would ask you not to think of it that way. You have something valuable, either ownership or grantorship into something that, let's hope, you believe in as a social entrepreneur. You are offering someone the chance to be a part of that, potentially to own a part of it, to be with you through that process. That should be viewed as valuable. So what you are doing is trying to strike a deal. Now, it doesn't mean that you shouldn't be grateful for the time someone is investing in learning about you. It doesn't mean you shouldn't be super thankful and grateful if they choose to invest or grant to you, but always believe in what you are offering and think of it as a deal, a transaction. I am giving you the chance to be a part of this. You are giving me the chance to move forward with your resources. Gratitude should flow both ways. The best investors or grantors are the people for whom that is true. So always remember, fundraising is always kind of crappy, but it's really crappy if you don't have a deep belief in what you're offering and you don't think that you're actually offering someone a chance to be a part of something special. If you're just kind of out there being like, I don't really know what I'm doing this for, A, you should rethink what you're doing, but B, it's not going to go very well because people can sense it. So if you have a deep belief in your pitch, in why you are offering someone the chance to be a part of it in whatever format you are, that is the key to good fundraising. And without it, it's really challenging, more challenging. So I hope this has all been helpful. I would love now to take your questions, make this more real for you directly in terms of the real life situations you're in, or delve more deeply into any of these points. So I'd love to open the floor. Alicia, why don't you go ahead? Oh, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Never mind. Go ahead.
Let's go. We'll do Alicia, then Whitley, then Martina. Oh, Alicia, if you're speaking, we can't hear you, unfortunately. Okay, Alicia, we're going to have to come back with you because we can't hear you, unless that's my connection, but I don't think it is. So we'll figure that out. Or Alicia, if you want to put your question in the chat, we're happy to address it that way as well. In the meantime, Whitley, why don't we go to you?
Hey, Oliver, good to see you. Thanks for doing this. Sorry, we do a lot of the Microsoft version of this, so I forgot how to raise my hand, but now I remember. So I'm really curious. So locally in Oklahoma City, we have very little social enterprise. And the big thing we run into is, we've been in the game for a decade, so we really understand what the impact looks like. We understand how far money can be stretched. but we're pitching against people who don't. And so oftentimes, dollar for dollar, we're going up against people who are promising a lot more because they don't know that they can't deliver, if that makes sense. So how do you overcome, kind of this like flashy excitingness for investors who may be a little green in the space, when obviously we're not going to overpromise to win a grant because we want to deliver and we want to build that relationship. But how do you defeat that, if that makes sense?
It's complicated. It's a great question. So there's probably 3 or 4 things that come to mind immediately. The first is within any funding ecosystem, there are funding skeptics. And it's funny, actually, Whitley. So with my venture capital firm, which is a very non-traditional venture capital firm, I often have the most success pitching people who have said no to a lot of venture capital firms because they don't like the hype. And I've kind of heard who those people are. And so when you come in and you say to that person, again, it's the know your audience piece. It's like, look, I know you get pitched a lot of startups. I know they promise the world. I'm sure you've heard this, that, and the other thing, right? Like, let's both agree that most of that is, not real, not true. I'm going to tell you what I really can do based on all this data. If that works for you, maybe we can work together. That's one population that's always interesting to go after if you've got kind of an overhyped market, right? For things like that. Number 2, you don't have to stay local, even if you, I know it's sometimes hard to go outside, but for example, look for sector-specific givers that are in other cities that have had success with what you're doing in those cities and that might want to expand or might want to help you. That's really important. If you have existing funders, having them go out and be avatars for you and say to people, look, the other guys are kind of full of it, but Whitley and his team are really on top of it. I can vouch for that. That kind of reference-based fundraising is really powerful, particularly in those situations. And last but not least, and this might be a little controversial, so forgive me, but there's always a band of the possible future that you offer to an investor. And you should never, ever, ever lie or misrepresent what's going on. However, I do see a lot of conscientious entrepreneurs kind of negotiate against themselves and give like the middle or the low version of what they think is possible. Try to give the aspirational but possible version of what you're pitching to your investors, right? So kind of maybe meet the hype crew halfway, right? And kind of, again, you never want to overinflate. I'm never in favor of people, BSing, but again, like just I've seen a lot of really quality entrepreneurs, and Resolution Fellows usually fall in that group, that kind of like haircut themselves. And that doesn't work to your advantage, because really fundraising is a lot of sales and marketing, right? So those are some tactics that I hope might be helpful. Excellent. Martina, I think you were next.
All right, thank you very much, and I hope you can hear me.
Yes.
This is the most insightful session that I've had this evening. Actually, today we had a meeting with my co-founder and discussing how can we deliver the best pitch to impress the funders and believe in what we are talking about. I'll give a scenario. Of recent, we had a formal conversation with the Impact Livelihood Fund. So we delivered all the materials. They called us in a due diligence, and we spoke to the best of our knowledge. But this is something that opened my mind. Like, how can I make sure in such scenarios that I can give the best conversation, that I can really impress the funder? Because since then we have not heard from them, and we think maybe we did not deliver something that was required. Maybe there were gaps in our mission or stories or mode of implementation. So I would love to know, what can I do in such scenarios?
Yeah, and sorry if I didn't really pick up the full thread of your question, but it is in the scenario that you feel like you've kind of left some things out, or that you didn't hit all the beats you wanted to in the pitch. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yes, if you're called in a normal conversation with a funder, a due diligence conversation, how do you handle such a conversation to make sure you're delivering what the funder is really interested in hearing?
Yeah. So, okay, so that's a really great question. So 2 things. The first thing is, a big mistake that that entrepreneurs often make is a lack of situational awareness. So, for example, I will be at the Clinton Global Initiative in 3 weeks. And what I see happen all the time is someone will see someone famous or wealthy at the Clinton Global Initiative, and they make a beeline for them in the hallway, and they try and give the full pitch in like for 30 minutes, right? And this person is just trying to get to the next session, and it's like not very contextual. And there's a feeling of need to like get it all out in that first meeting because you may never see them again. I would recommend something slightly different to go to your question. You should always have kind of a short, punchy version of what you're doing, which you can deliver like 2 or 3 really critical points, and then ask for a next meeting where A, you can do a little bit of research, right? Which goes to your question if you don't really know what they're looking for. B, you can be prepared, and you can have an open session where the expectation is that they have time, they're going to hear the whole pitch. And then you can also do your follow-up, because where I thought your question was going is, everybody, my God, I mean, if I could tell you, every time I finish pitching the fund or resolution project, I'm always like, oh man, I didn't mention this one thing, and that's what email is for, right? You follow up. Thank you so much for your time. I realized when thinking about our conversation that I didn't share with you the impact statistics from our Southern operations or whatever it is, right? And so you put that in the follow-up, and that's okay. No pitch is ever 100% perfect. But in respect to your question, if you can have that short version of your pitch that is going to just capture attention and get you the next meeting, that's a really a key part of it. Because remember what I said before, which is fundraising is about getting to the next meeting until at some point someone says yes or no, right? And so you don't want to necessarily feel like you have to get it all out in that first setting, that you hit every beat and that you were there. That's actually usually not the right way to handle that. Does that help with your question?
Sure, it does. Thank you very much.
You got it. And it also brings up a really interesting thing, which is extremely important, which is follow-up, right? So like follow-up is critical. It's like, I mean, I've seen so many people have like a great meeting. It's like the Olympics, and then they stick the landing and they get a 10 out of 10 from the judges, and then like nothing happens for a week. And it's like crazy, because then the funder is all gone, right? They don't really remember how great the session was. They've had 50 more meetings. The follow-up is super critical, and it gives you the chance to clean up all the stuff you didn't get a chance to say. Wandile, over to you.
Thank you, and yeah, great session. I guess my question is around pre-seed pitching, where you're effectively still trying to find your perfect product market fit, and it's somewhat speculative. So coming into the pitch from the angle of you're offering value for money, it's an exchange. How do you evaluate your value when you're still sort of building to find that product market fit? I just read an article the other day where they're talking about how Uber, just made profit this year. It was just 320 million, if I'm not mistaken, or something. But there's sort of a long journey of building to sort of get there. How do you evaluate yourself?
Yeah, I mean, look, Uber is like a terrible example for all of you to I mean, Uber is like a really weird story. I was involved from very early days, not a pathway you necessarily want to walk. That said, good question. So the earlier you go in the process, the more a pitch is about your vision and your approach, and then comps, right? So because you have to paint a picture of, I always say it's like a picture of a believable future, right? So what is a picture of a believable future? And so the way to do that is to say, look, this is what I want to do. This is where we're going. This is how I plan to approach it. So if I don't have product market fit yet, but here are the things I'm doing to get there, and they're well established, and they're we think we can get there because people get there, right? And I think of these 3 organizations that have traveled roughly the same pathway, and look at how successful they've been. So there's some credibility here. So it's the less data that is available, the more you have to go off of vision, approach, the structure, and the the background of your team in order to deliver that. Hey, the guy I've got building products has done this 3 times. He's really, or she's really, adept at, so you understand my meaning? You have to kind of like plot map it, because if you don't have the thing itself, you've got to show how you get to the thing itself. And that's all about process, and all about, showing that it's been done before and it's less risky. And then of course, there's a question, if it's a for-profit venture, which I know yours is, Wandile, then it's also about valuation, right? Because I mean, the earlier you come, the higher the risk profile, but the higher the reward too. So, you want to be careful. Now, in the US, very mature US venture capital markets, we have things like safes and convertible notes, which also push off the question of valuation quite a bit. I'm happy to dive more deeply into that offline because it's, you know, very specific to tech startups in the United States, so maybe less generally applied. But, you know, that question of like, what is value for value received here? The earlier you go, the more structured those things have to be. That's really another way to think about the value. So those are some pointers there. Awesome. I'm going to say Sagar. Is that am I saying that correctly? Good.
Yeah.
All right.
Thanks, Oliver, for that session. Pretty insightful. I'm just going to jump right to the question. I think I really like what you said in the end about, you know, convertible notes, something that Mauka has used for its pre-seed as well in India. So what I want to first understand is, this is the first time Mauka will be pitching to impact investors. We've always been, say, talking to, say, venture capitalists. We also talked to the government there. We got our first pre-seed from the government of India. So what I really wanted to understand is in terms of the story building, or in terms of the how do you build a story you know, with impact investors as opposed to VC. I know you touched upon this in terms of, you know, people who really want to look at impact in numbers, but is there something more specific when I have to sort of move into the direction? And I know you also come from the VC plus the nonprofit space, so I think you'd be able to better guide me there. That's number one. Number two is the context education. Now that I come from India, how much of context education do I have to do to, say, investors in the US? If I was pitching to Indian investors, they're pretty clear about the context and about the problem. How much time in my pitch should I spend explaining the context for individuals who might not be aware of that? So those are two questions that have been on my mind. So would love some clarity there.
Yep, I'm just taking a couple notes here. There's three good points within this. So great question. Couple things. On the context question, you know, I mean, with American investors, if you're pitching a startup in a non-American economy, you have to do a lot of education because American investors are often pretty stupid about that sort of thing. And so, you know, you might start the pitch by saying, you know, hi, you know, investor, let me not assume your knowledge of the Indian market. If you have it, please let me know. I don't want to make any assumption, but in case it's helpful, let me give you 2 or 3 points to just get you situated in the way we're thinking about things here, what comps look like in India, what the, you know, so I think you're perfectly free to do that. And it's also possible that like you should be able to do a little bit of identification beforehand, how likely they are to know. You know, there's American funds that have an office in Delhi, right? And like they're probably going to be a little more smart than like a Silicon Valley investor who probably doesn't know much about Chicago, much less, you know, India. And so that's number one. Number two, you know, I think that there is an element with your question about the impact investors. It's really important. And actually, Sibaga, I think in the chat asked how we identify the type of audience. This all goes into the same thing. Audience identification comes in 3 parts. You got introduced to an investor through a certain vector. And if that vector is a person that you can talk to, get as much intelligence as you can about what motivates the investor before you talk to them. Number 2, do your research. It seems elementary, but it's amazing how many times I get on with someone who's asking me for money and they're like, tell me a little bit about you. Like, are you in New York? And I'm like, yeah, man. And like 2 seconds, you can know that because everything I'm doing is in New York. Like, why are we talking about this right now? So you can do a little bit of research. You shouldn't be like all stalker, like Oliver, I understand you have an 18-month-old son. I saw that on Instagram. How's he doing? What school is he at? You know, that's weird. And I've had that happen too. But you know, basic research, you know, what's the latest thing that I wrote that I put on LinkedIn? What kind of person am I? That sort of thing. And then last but not least, there's, you know, at those first few minutes of any conversation, when just by the reaction of the person, you can start to tell what they are. And I try and put little breadcrumbs, right? So like if any conversation about Resolution Project, I'll start and I'll say, you know, Resolution, you know, we have, you know, about 700 Resolution Fellows, 86 countries, more than 30 states in America, 6 million beneficiaries around the world. You know, let me tell you an amazing story from your neck of the woods in Baltimore, and if they're kind of really keyed in on the statistics, then that tells me something. If they're really keyed in on the story from Baltimore, and then this is all happening like the first 60 seconds of the pitch, you can just kind of tell from, because it's a very, you know, pitching is very reactive, right? It's not just like when you're on stage in a pitch competition, you give your pitch and it either works or it doesn't. If you're on a one-on-one, it's constant reactions, right? And I think that's very important. Specific to impact investors, Sagar. Impact investors are the most differentiated group you will ever find between story and model givers. An impact investor could be a wealthy family that made a crap ton of money, and they've decided, because the next gens are really focused on social good, that they want everything to be for impact. And if you don't move them with a story, you're dead, right? And like the hope, they made a ton of money, they have more money than they know what to do with, and their decision is now we're going to put it out the door. They're almost thinking of it like program related investments or philanthropy, and that is the ultimate story giver. On the other hand, if you look at my firm's website, we talk about growth and returns first, right? And we are like way out there on social media, in the podcast and blogosphere, everywhere, talking about the fact that we think impact investing can be non-concessionary, that we can have high growth, venture-backed returns. And I'm telegraphing that, so you know I'm an impact investor, but if you don't make a business case to me, you're also dead in the water. I'm a model giver, right? And so there's nothing more differentiated in the story of model givers than impact investors, who some of us are out there like militantly talking about the fact that impact investing can give you just the same, if not a better financial return. And others are like, I don't care. I want to invest money, and if I get it back, great, but I want to do it for impact. And you can tell, like, we are all pretty obvious about that, right? Like people talk about it all the time. So that's kind of how you want to think about it. Okay, Alicia, are you back? Can we hear you now?
To hear me, Oliver? No.
Yes, we got you. All right, great.
All right, that is perfect. Well, my question is about it's about how you pitch yourself to an investor as a hybrid organization. Because I think that is who we are as Women Income Network, and sometimes I get confused on whether to ask for an investment or for a grant. For example, I'll give you a context. At Women Income Network, we train women to become goat farmers and ensure that we provide them with the resources that they need to begin on this journey. However, in order to establish markets for them, we are moving into the space of ensuring that we have a feed processing plant that is able to take up all their produces. And I feel like that part of our proposal is like a profit-making part, because when we purchase from the women, we add value and we are able to sell. So we are bringing in equity. So my question is, when we are pitching to an investor, would we be able to, are we able to ask for grant and investment at the same time, or we focus on like one bit of grant or investment? And the other question was, actually, it was interesting when you're talking about grounding yourself during the networking, and also like sending emails and follow-up emails to the networks that you have been connected to. Because recently I participated in the Mandela Washington Fellowship, and my mentor has connected me to a number of people whom I've like written to like 700 times, and I have not gotten any sort of feedback. And I was starting to think I was the one with a problem. Now that you talk about it, like my biggest question is, when you're following up with the same request, do you just keep on like with the same messaging? Do you keep changing your message? Do you copy and paste after 2 weeks? What happens during these follow-up messages?
Yes, so two pretty big questions. The first one, I'm going to give you perhaps an unsatisfying answer, which is it's really situational, right? So like, of course, I mean, look, for me, I have resolution in my firm. And so in the broadest sense of all, if I'm introduced to a family office, I kind of have to do some thinking about like, all right, what am I bringing them? And oftentimes, you know, the introduction came through a particular vector. So like you want to listen to who made the introduction and what they think that the family or the funder or the foundation or whatever is interested in. It's also not wrong to ask. So you can say, you know, having heard about us, like what is available, you know, how do you interact with companies like ours or organizations like ours? Do you prefer grants? Do you prefer investments? Do you do both? There's also some research you can do as to what people are likely to be willing to do. So you can read in the papers or, you know, on the internet, whether or not they frequently are associated with investments or grants. But it's just kind of doing the investigative work, Alicia. There's not like a science to it. And then, you know, again, like there's nothing wrong with saying, how do you normally support organizations like ours? Do you prefer to grant? Do you prefer to invest? Do you do both? You know, it's totally fair to ask questions when, you know, like we expect to get questions as funders. It's just make them not questions that are like unbelievably readily knowable by doing like very basic 2 minutes of Googling, right? Now let's talk about the second question you asked, which is on the follow-up. This is a really important thing. So there's kind of two things you can do here. The first is I believe in relentless follow-up. It's what I was talking about before. And so, yes, I wouldn't copy and paste because then it's just really clear that you're almost using like a mailer, right? But like I say, you have like a slight variation every time. So every 2 weeks, and for me, it's 2 weeks. Some people do it 1 week. I think that's too quick. Some people do it monthly, whatever. Pick your cadence that you like. And then you say like, hey, Wandile, I hope you had a good, if they're Americans, maybe it's I hope you had a good Labor Day. I'm just checking in to see if now would be a good time for us to chat, and always keep that kind of light, positive tone. But you don't have to replace the body of what you're doing. At the bottom of the email is the information you sent them on your venture. You can leave that, right? So, but just do that. Now, the other thing is though, in the case that you're talking about with a mentor who made an introduction, I wonder if you removed the mentor from the CC line. Did you happen to do that?
Did I remove the mentor from the CC?
Yes.
Yes, I did.
Never, ever, ever do that. Remember, the person who you were introduced to has no idea who you are. They probably super busy. They might have gotten the recommendation from their friend who's your mentor, but they're like, it's kind of lost and they don't really remember why. When I make an introduction, I tell people, do not remove me from the CC. I will either tell someone, hey, it's time to move me to BCC or take me off or not. But if I made the introduction, they're going to respond to you, at least at first, not because of you, but because of me. And so if you take me off, you take 90% of the pressure off the email. So one very tactical thing I can tell you is never, for all of you, never remove the introducer from the CC line. Never do it. If they tell you, please remove me, then you do it. But otherwise, it's just more pressure on the introduction because you need everything.
Looks like
Lost
we
all of that
Oliver.
if you BCC someone, okay?
Oliver, you cut out for like a good 5 seconds of the last answer.
Oh, shoot.
It seemed like your connection dropped.
Yep, well, that is sometimes the case. Okay, are we better now or should I go off video for a minute?
No, you're good. You're coming through clear now.
Okay, so what I was I was kind of really emphasizing the point that if you drop your introducer from the CC line, you're losing a lot of the benefit of having them. And just what I probably was saying when I dropped out is when you when you're doing your respectful follow-up cadence and you keep the introducer on the CC line, they'll get mad for you and they'll be like, hey, Whitley, I introduced you to my mentee. Why are you not getting back to her? Right. And that happens on a text chain over on the side. So like, again, just I guess never BCC or take the introducer off the chain. I don't know why that was invented, but you should never do that. Not until you're asked specifically to do so. Okay.
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much, Oliver. And I think I would like just end with like a few questions. I hope you're not bothered by it. My other 2 questions were when we talked about that we have 2 givers, like the story giver and the model giver, we later added on like the model is the impact giver. In an event that we are pitching in an audience, which I think AIC will be like, I don't think it is going to be like a one-on-one. So in an event that we are pitching in an audience kind of pitch, and we have a mixture of story givers and model givers, we might want to combine all the 2. So how do we ensure that we deliver such a pitch while not being so bulky? And then the other one is just a pointer to help me understand what exactly should be included in my data room and what does a deal documentation look like? Thank you.
Well, the data room and deal documentation is completely dependent on what you're raising, whether it's priced, unpriced, whether you're a nonprofit, for-profit, what stage you're at. So that's a much more complicated question that we should handle offline. I have a sample data room that I can send you, but it's for like a US tech startup raising a price, like a priced round. So it's pretty detailed, like 70 or 80 things you need. But I'm happy, Toby, you and I can work on getting that information out to folks. And again, like, by the way, if I send you that data room, if you can do that data room, then like you'll never need another data room ever again in your whole life, right? So like that's the one you want. So to your question though, if you don't know, like your basic pitch, where if you were just pushed onto a stage in a dark room and you had no idea how many people were out there and where they're from, every basic pitch, I think, is what I briefly referred to before, which is the sandwich. So the best sandwich starts with the piece of bread at the front, which is your personal story. I got into this because of this personal experience, this passion that I have. That speaks to the story givers most of all, right? But you get into it. This is why I'm here. Then the middle of the sandwich, the meat, the sauce, and the cheese and lettuce and tomato, that's all the different parts of the model, how you're going to do it. And then at the end, you say, we've been doing this, and let me tell you the story of these two beneficiaries. And then, and the best part is the the olive on top of the sandwich is if you can then, the last thing you say is the breadth of the vision. So if you start with, I'm in this for these reasons, I mean, I'll give you the Resolution Project's pitch, just like the 1 minute pitch on Resolution, just so you can see what I mean. It's something like this. Like when I was in school, I ran these large conferences and I would sit in the audience and people would say, you're a leader of the future. And I would have 2,000 students in my audience and everyone would kind of look a little dejected because it's so distant to be told you're a leader of the future. And I was sitting there thinking to myself, like, why is that? Why do we not start today? What is it about us that is deferred? I want it to be now. And I think if we did it now, that we would have the ability to go further and faster and bigger if we start the experience now. Why should youth not want to get involved in making social change? That's what I was thinking, sitting in those audiences, being told time and again that we were leaders of the future. What we've designed at Resolution is the Social Venture Challenge, the Resolution Fellowship, and the ongoing support and mentorship that we provide our fellows. Then fill in the blanks on all that we go through all of that. The Social Venture Challenge, 10 to 12 per year, 60 to 70 new fellows, $1,000 to $10,000 grants, mentorship, et cetera. We go through 700 fellows, 86 countries, 30 states, $9 billion of market cap, 5 million benefits, 6 million beneficiaries, all the statistics. Then we say, okay, now that you understand how we're going to do what we're doing, let me just bring it home for you. Let me tell you the story of Juan Delia. Let me tell you the story of Whitley. We met at this conference. I was amazed by this story because you know what? This young man was standing in front of me and he gave me this. And I was like, if he is here coming from where he came from, we have to do something to help. And you know what's happened? Let me tell you the story of the last 5 years. Now, like these are the things that have happened, right? So what I want you to think about when you're thinking about Resolution is we know what we're doing. We come from an authentic place. We have these great stories, but we have 700 people, of the type of Wandile and Whitley and, all these amazing folks. And we can do so much more. We can be the premier organization in the world. You should support us. And if you're just talking to a dark room or you don't know, you hit enough, kind of beats with that to at least get yourself a few meetings. See what I mean?
Yeah, that answers me perfectly. Thank you so much, Oliver.
Excellent. So I think we are pretty much out of time. Maybe we'll just end with a question from Sam and see if I can get it in quickly.
Hey Oliver, how are you? Thank you so much for this amazing presentation. I was just wondering, would you include budget and prices? And for example, I always say that a meal in McDonald's costs $10. With those $10, you will be able to support 20 meals for a child throughout a whole month. Like, how would you include budget in the pitch? And if we should do so.
Yeah, I think of budget and financials is critical to any pitch. That's a little bit what we were first talking about know what you need, the use of proceeds. So I think that's really important. I will tell you that it depends on the audience whether that McDonald's thing works. Like if you do the McDonald's thing on me, I'm going to be like, I don't care. Like if I want McDonald's, I'm going to get McDonald's. Convince me that what you're doing is worth it. I don't have to pick between you and McDonald's, right? Like I could just pick you because what you're doing is worthwhile. So you just have to kind of understand, I've often myself as an investor found those kind of things to be like a little bit salesy, but they work for some people, right? There's a reason that they're in marketing. So don't change that because of me. I'm just telling you, not every person reacts well to that. But the critical thing is, what's the information? What does it cost you? We used to say, the basic Resolution Fellowship grant was somewhere between $1,500 and $3,000 for the longest time. And the reaction from funders was, no way. You can't possibly do any impact with that. And we were like, and by the way, in Q&A, and maybe this is a cool thing to end on, in Q&A, the best thing you can do for funders is lay traps. And what I mean by lay a trap is say something that is going to cause a question that you can kill the answer, right? So we used to do that all the time with Resolution. We used to say $1,500 to $3,000 will launch a new social entrepreneur almost anywhere in the world. And the funders invariably were like, no effing way, right? No chance that is true. And we'd be like, really? let's walk you through a few examples. And now you're into the story, but you're doing it from the place of the model, right? So like if you can lay traps where you know that you can just crack that answer out of the park, that's a kind of a great way to also manage the Q&A. With that, I do have to leave
Thank
you
you,
all. but-
Oliver.
Yeah, you got it. So I'm sure that there'll be some follow-ups. I hope that this was useful to you all. And I'm wishing you the best of luck in AIC and many other things as well. I will see you all hopefully very soon.
Thank you, Oliver. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you all for joining us on this AIC workshop. I'll be sending out a copy of the recording as well as some meeting notes after this call. If you do have any follow-up questions, please just send them to the AIC email address and we'll move those forward and check with Oliver. Otherwise, I will see you all very soon at the next event.
Thank you, Oliver.
Thank you.